Hi, welcome to another tutorial video. In this tutorial video, what I'm going to be talking to you about is high and low level languages and what the difference between high and low level languages is, and some further information about low level languages, and then the advantages and disadvantages between high and low level languages. So let's take a look then at what we're talking about when we're talking about high and low level languages. Some examples of languages that are high level and some examples of languages that are more low level. So in my examples then, Python is our highest level language that we've got here. So it's the most like if I just wrote down some instructions for someone to carry out in English, that's what Python is the closest to me doing to me doing that, writing out instructions in English. Then we've got Java and C++. So these are slightly lower level than sort of scripting languages like Python, but still quite high level. So it's still quite easy to look at some code written in Java, for example, and sort of work out what it's doing. And then we've got C, and that's slightly lower level than Java and C++. We've then got assembly language, which is now when we get to assembly language, we're at, we'll come on to this in a moment, but we're at or pretty much a one-to-one mapping between the number of instructions some code takes to write in assembly language and the number of instructions code takes to write in machine code. And then we've got machine code. And machine code is our lowest level language, and what is important to remember is that only machine code can be directly executed by the CPU. So all of these languages here have to be translated in some way into machine code before they can be executed by the CPU. So let's take a closer look at low-level languages then. So we've got our machine code, and machine code is our lowest level language, and machine code is represented in binary, and machine code instructions are specific to a processor or a family of processors. So machine code is represented in binary, and this is specific to a processor or family of processors. So often there's two languages that out of these that I've got here that are all 100% definitely considered to be low-level languages, and that is assembly and machine code. I'm going to talk some more now about in this part of the video about assembly and machine code. So the difference between one of the differences between assembly and machine code is that assembly needs to be translated into machine code by a program called an assembler before it's executed. And that comes back to the point I made earlier about every language apart from machine code needs to be translated into machine code before it can be executed by the CPU. And as I also mentioned earlier, assembly language has a one-to-one correspondence with machine code. So that means that one assembly instruction is almost always equivalent to one machine code instruction. And in contrast, if we've got higher level language, for example Python, we could have one instruction in Python, so maybe assigning a particular value to a variable. I could represent many machine code instructions. So Python doesn't have that one-to-one mapping with machine code. It's assembly that has that one-to-one mapping with machine code. And the other thing about assembly language is that it's often used to develop software for embedded systems. One of the reasons that this is the case is because with assembly language you can get much finer control over things like memory management, which is very useful if you're doing software development for embedded systems. Okay, so let's move on to looking at the advantages and disadvantages of high and low level languages. So advantage of high level languages then. So one advantage of high level languages is that it's easy for humans to read code in high level languages. Another advantage is that programming paradigms exist in higher level languages. So for example, object-oriented programming or functional programming, which aid software development. So these advantages here lead to faster software development times, fewer bugs in code, and for the bugs that are left in program code, they're easier to debug. Okay, so that's just some of the advantages of using high-level languages. Now I'm going to move on to looking at the advantages of using low-level languages. So the main advantage of using low-level languages is that you can have much finer control over the particular system that you're programming for. So you can design programs to run much more efficiently on the target hardware, as programmers are writing code for, often writing code for a specific architecture. And low-level languages are often faster to translate into machine code if they're not already machine code. And the speed of translating a language, whether it be compiling or interpreting a language from high level to machine code, was often a factor in which language software developers were choosing when they were starting out on a project. Particularly if fast compiled or translation times were really important, they would often go for assembly language over, say, a higher level language. But nowadays, with faster computers, compile and translation times are not so much of a factor in deciding which language to use for a particular project. Okay, so that's just a brief overview of high and low level languages. I hope you found it useful, and thanks for watching.